Hello, everyone. Welcome to Canucks this week. I would like to thank everyone who watched last week's video. It feels like last year. What a year it's been this week.
Yeah, we recorded right before JT Miller got traded.
No, we didn't. We didn't. But I do want to explain this. So we had very strong viewership numbers, but clearly everyone was coming to us to see the reaction to the trade and proceeded to hate watch and then rubbish us for speaking a bunch of nonsense that was irrelevant by the time they watched it. We
Oops.
actually recorded it Thursday morning, but because of various staff challenges and a procedure and some technical issues, didn't get posted until Saturday. And then as such, we had plans early in the week to get to this, but again, there's all sorts of stuff going on. So we get to this now.
The news never stops.
And the news never stops. Whether or not we can
Like,
report it, that's a separate thing. So
the news never stops. And just on that, like it's just to kind of contemplate. I've got a side thing I'm working on that I'll talk about soon enough, but a different thing away from what we do. And I went, I was like, I was going to pick some time this weekend to work on it. But then the JT Miller trade happened. I had to deal with the rest of that.
yeah,
I don't even remember. Was there a game? There was a game. Like there was a game on Friday. There was the Alvin availability. I had to go all the way out to the airport. Then
yeah,
it snows, and I'm dealing with
yeah.
and all these things, and I'm like didn't have time. Then it's just knock on effects. There's trying to figure out all these things around, doing the job, doing the snow.
I am
And then they
convinced.
signed Marcus Pettersson.
Yeah,
I was at the library to just work on this project, and I was at the library, and I sit down, and someone texts me, "Oh, that's a pretty good deal." I'm like, "Oh, come on."
I'm convinced that there's a directive from ownership that they can make a deal on a Wednesday morning, and they'll say, "Let's hold it until
Yeah.
Friday night to screw with the media." Because the example is so many of their moves have happened late on a Friday. Either that or they hit the bar, and that's where the deals get ironed out.
Yeah, exactly. And to be clear, I am not complaining. This is a great
Oh
job.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The
It's just
definition of first world
it's such
problems.
a testament to like how when everything happens at once. Doesn't happen.
Yeah,
When things happen slowly then quickly. That's the expression, right? And it was
yeah.
literally that's been my past week. It feels like.
So a few things to get to here. I don't want to cover old ground, but we should cover at least through the lens of where we are a week later. Your assessment now, taking into consideration obviously the second part of the deal, obviously, getting Marcus Pettersson re-signed. Your assessment now of how the Canucks did in these movements. We know they weren't dealing with a position of strength with Miller in the first place. Looking around, we do this weekly compendium aggregation of what people outside of this market are saying about the Canucks. It's kind of middling. Saravalli, of course, because Saravalli is a guy who just obviously has the answers to everything and hates Vancouver and has trashed their fans. Like for whatever reason, the guy has I won't even say what he has for Vancouver, but he's really been the most critical, saying that it's blown up the locker room and everyone hates what they got back. But most people that I've seen outside of the market are seeming C plus, B to B plus in terms of the deal. They think, considering the circumstance, that's not my take on it. I'm just saying
Yeah.
that's the reaction I've seen from the rest of the NHL. So how do you assess how, again, sober second thought, how do you assess how this all went down and what the Canucks have ended up with?
Well, it's the two trades in tandem. I mean, in a way, it is a three-way trade. A three-team trade. Certainly, when they made the Miller trade, you sat back and you look, okay, they've actually done two things. Or sort of three things. They've picked up a center that they needed, and he's an interesting player. He's not a JT Miller replacement. We know that. We knew they weren't going to get that. They got an interesting enough defense prospect, but you know what? Let's be real. I mean, as much as they may be high on Victor Mancini, let's be real. Think about where their depth chart's trending toward next year, right? You've got Hronek, you got Myers. You know that much, right? You probably got Tom Willander. So what are we even talking about? It's nice to have extra spare parts and guys you can use in a pinch. That's fine. Let's be realistic. Whatever. They got a first-round pick. That's nothing to sniff at. That's whether you use it or you're gonna use it as currency. That's a handy thing. But the big thing was they opened up a ton of cap space, and they didn't have to retain anything in the Miller deal. They literally got a second chance. They got to say, we get to use this money in a different way. We get to rethink about how we want to set what we're doing. And to me, that was a massive part of this deal. And then, of course, they turn around and use the first round pick. They use the currency in that to add a player that they needed. They had been needing a second pairing defenseman
Bo
for
Horvat
more than a
trade
year.
2.0, right?
Yeah. In many ways, exactly. But in many ways, almost structured better than this because Hedel is more useful than Anthony Beauvillier was ever going to be. Anthony Beauvillier was kind of thrown in as a cheap spare part. They were able to turn him into essentially, if I'm not mistaken, they turned him into Nikita Zadorov, which was fine. But like, they've got a player that is better than Nikita Zadorov. I think is probably at least Ian Cole, if not better, in terms of because he's younger. They added a very handy defenseman, the kind of defenseman they want to get. So in terms of managing their position, they did as well as could be expected. Now, they still don't have the best player. JT Miller, clearly the best player in this scenario. But they'd reached the conclusion they weren't going to be able to carry on with him. We're still trying to figure out the details of that. But they had to make a move. And so when you're coming from a position where you aren't in one of strength, like they were with Miller, where he was also able to determine essentially where he wanted to go, they came out as pretty good. This worked out pretty well. Now, the final question to me becomes, what are they able to do with that cap space? Because the cap space is the final remaining bit that is fascinating, and they're looking at it. And we can clearly understand that there's, obviously they're going to see what happens here with Elias Pettersson, and we're going to talk about him. I'm sure a fair bit more. But
which one?
Forward.
Sorry. Yes. No.
But
we'll talk about both of them actually,
right?
Yeah.
But in tandem, they have a chance to whether they just put a new guy in front of Pettersson, who's like the other center, or they just go a completely new route. They have a few options here. Because in the long run, they're going to need to add another forward. Now, whether that's and then, of course, the other dynamic is whether that's to replace Brock Besser. They use Besser as another trade chip. It's actually a very interesting time in terms of roster construction. Obviously not the plan that they set out with, even at the beginning of the season. Certainly not the one that they thought coming out of last season they'd be executing on. But they put themselves in a very interesting roster building position.
So let me just ask you this, because you brought up cap space. Conventional wisdom has been pretty much for the last year, Brock Besser's going to get traded.
Right.
Does having more cap space increase the likelihood even a little bit that they would extend him here? Or is it just a fact that they view his future differently than what he and his agent do? And that ship is going to sail at some point.
Well, I mean, I will give credit our friend Rick Dollywell for explaining what I've been thinking.
He's your friend.
That guy, Rick Dollywell. Dolly pointing out this on Friday morning that essentially when you hear the owners saying, or sorry, the managers, the general manager saying,
general manager and the owner are the same person, aren't they?
No.
Sorry, we need a laugh track.
No, this is just endless hijinks. Hijinks. No, when you hear that, when you hear that the general manager saying things like, he's going to have to find a way, we have to find a way to get come together, basically agree on something. He's basically saying we're a long way apart, and that's literally what I was thinking. The way he's been talking is basically saying, yeah, we look at our number and you guys can look at your number, and well, they're not the same thing, and they're far apart. That's very clear.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate because
so it's less. By the way, come together. Now I have that Beatles song playing in the back of my mind. I'm gonna have to try and
we really need someone just doing drops for us, don't we?
I do. Yeah. But so it's more of a value. It's more of an issue of evaluation rather than cap issues.
Oh yeah, no, there's no cap issues here. The Canucks are in a strong cap position. Obviously, cap's going up. The OEL. Remember the OEL buyout? It's there. It goes up next year, by the way.
Yeah.
But the Canucks have put themselves in a position where they can weather that. It's not.
Plus, there's Luongo's cap hit.
Yeah, it's
not to open old wounds.
To be clear, it's not there anymore.
Yeah, I know. I just
let's call Jim Benning and see what he thinks.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah. Anyway, they're in a good spot, and cap. There are no cap considerations here. They got Marcus Pettersson on an incredibly team-friendly number. I thought that was a number they'd be aiming for. I didn't think they would get it.
Yeah.
But they got it. So good for them.
So I'd sent you a message earlier in the week when we're just talking about some issues. And I know we've got this big break where the Canucks won't be playing. We'll be looking for stories, but you've been talking from the start of the season about how you thought they'd obviously, and they were very frank about making a deal for defensemen, that everyone looked at this team and yeah, the blue line's the area that needs help, even though we'll get onto their scoring struggles in a second. And yeah, there've been certain players who have struggled this year. There was the things we just even talked about last week about, moves they made in the offseason that didn't quite pan out. But in the space of a week, the stroke of a couple of pens, or keystrokes, more likely, Elias Pettersson, the blue liner, and Marcus Pettersson dramatically reshaped this defense, I think, in terms of how you view it going forward. You mentioned Wielander, and obviously a guy like Jet Wu had been a prospect forever, but doesn't look like he's going to get over that hump. So what was looking like the glaring weakness, I'm not going to say it's a position of strength yet, but it's no longer the liability than it was, or is it? I see you make a face there.
I look at this two ways. I mean, would you like to have a longer list of prospects than the Canucks currently have? Yes, absolutely. Do they have a mildly interesting, sort of B tier of prospects, guys that are, could give you depth minutes in a pinch? Probably. Like Mancini is an example, right? Like he's a guy that he's already played NHL games. The Canucks are high on. They think he can improve a little bit. That's good to have. You can never run out of sort of competent NHL defensemen. But realistically, as they say, all prospects are bad. So even if you have a good list of prospects, of A-list prospects, how many do you actually need? If you look at the list right now, like
at least 6.
But I mean, in terms of guys on the edge, right? Because
of
who your
course,
top end are,
facetious.
right? The Canucks know that their top 3 are, for the next 2 seasons at least, are Quinn Hughes, Philip Hronek, and Marcus Pettersson, right?
Yeah.
The rest is kind of, you'd like to have a good partner for Pettersson, you'd like to have a good partner, for Hughes, whichever. So you committed to Tyler Myers as being a depth guy, and that's fine because he's still pretty handy. Carson Soucy obviously is a big question mark now, but you've got Marcus Pettersson pushing, or not Elias Pettersson, the defenseman. You're trying to figure these things out. And so what else do you need? Like, you need an improvement on Noel Juleson, I suppose, right? But that's, one of your young guys can be that. Can you've got guys that have already been mentioned, like, can Cole McWard? I mean, they had high hopes for Cole McWard. I don't think Cole McWard is going to get there. He kind of stalled out a bit like Jet Wu. He's a year younger than Jet Wu, but this is what, Cole McWard, we haven't seen him since the beginning of the season. Guillaume Brisebois, we know that they think he's competent enough to play in the NHL, but he's also going to be UFA, right? Like Mark Friedman, like there's a basket of guys that are kind of in that range, right?
A sea of Friedmans?
What's that?
A sea of Friedmans?
I mean, you know what? In a way,
to co-opt our term from our old friend Jason Boschman.
But in those days, of course, Botch's point about the Sea of Granules is that there's a bunch of guys that just like, what are we even doing here? Like these guys are all the same kind of whatever, and they don't move the meter at all.
Yeah, the NFL terminology is a jag, just a guy.
Yeah,
so you're just a guy.
That's fine, and like you need those guys, but you don't want to have them too high up the lineup. So is Kirill Kudryavtsev in that list? Probably. He's certainly not going to be a top-end defenseman. But they have it. They're like, okay, he could play some NHL minutes for us, and we'll be fine. And you just need a bunch of guys. And so that's like, I don't get too fussed about it. You do need obviously top-end players like they do with Lekaramaki. And they believe in Tom Wielander, right? Like they think both those, and in a certain degree, Elias Pettersson, the defenseman, right? Like that's a tier of guys that they think are going to make it. And so you're trying to hope those darts that you throw, Vilmer Ulriksson, could he be something? Probably not. Like I said, all prospects are bad. But you start looking at Ty Mueller. Like Tyler Mueller went to the AHL All-Star games having a pretty decent AHL rookie season. Is he going to be... He's probably just a guy, right? Is he going to be more? No. Ratu, like we've seen him enough. Too slow, but he can give you NHL minutes. But you still need the challenge becomes finding guys in that next year so you can make decisions about players like Brock Besser. Do we really need to commit to Brock Besser because we have Jonathan Lekaramaki coming in ready? That becomes the question.
Yeah. So if you look at the construct, and we'll just take a very base, cliche, stereotypical what you look for on your defense core. Obviously, Quinn
Right.
Hughes checks every box that you got. Like they don't have to find the power play quarterback. They the guy can break out of his own end. Like no one does it better than him anyway. So you've got a lead end that way. Roenick got the big shot. Okay, good. So you're right. You're talking about the top end. Um, the one, correct me if I'm wrong, but the one area where maybe you might look that they still need to address on the blue line in many ways is that Zadorov quality of big, physical, nasty, but not a liability. I mean, you can find big guys who play defense who can add the grit and some toughness, but they not necessarily, they're going to give the puck away, or they're not going to, their coverage is, they're too slow, as you were talking about with certain prospects. Do you think that they still need sort of like the big net front presence to move guys out of the way? Because if I look at it, I never understood why people were so reluctant to sign Zadorov. And I know there was revisionist history last week, but one of the reasons is the regular season will go forever. He was their best player in the playoffs. He really
Yeah.
was to me.
Yeah.
Scored, nasty, got under the skin of the
Yeah.
opposition,
Yeah.
raised his game when you want it raised most. And so if
Right.
everyone's like, he's not worth 5 million, okay, well, maybe not during the regular season, but sure as hell he was during the playoffs.
Mm.
So is that sort of edge and physical presence something that this team could still hope to add?
Sure. I mean, I think they were hoping that Vinny DeHarnay would be that. He's obviously not here anymore. Derek Forbort doesn't really play that game, although he's a big physical guy. I mean, Elias Pettersson, the defenseman, has a lot of bite to his game. So that's something that is worth watching, because that is something that sets him apart. He is not a Zadorov type player. He's not a guy that has swagger leading the rush the way Zadorov did. He does have some aggressive instincts. I mean, Rick Tocchet singled this out the other day after Tuesday's big win against Colorado. Like, Pettersson played aggressive and he played smart and he didn't get caught out. And that is always the sign. You can see it right away. You're like, okay, this kid's got a chance. He's not playing passive. He's not playing a bit nervous or a bit scared. Like, Brisebois, like he clearly is NHL competent, but you never think of him being, oh, he's going to try to make something happen this shift. Elias Pettersson has done that a couple times. And that is the statement about confidence. And that confidence, obviously tied with skill set, is the reason why you see a guy succeed over a guy like Brisebois, who's just kind of bounced along and it's essentially what you would call a quad A player, right? Like he's really an AHL player, but he'll bounce up enough, But like Elias Pettersson has a very good chance of being more than that. He's all of 20, right? Like he's a young guy, and the parallels with like Chris Tanev. I mean, Tanev got in because of opportunity, and then immediately impressed and showed he was closer than people thought he was. So it's a situation where, yeah, they would like another banger, another guy that's going to make things difficult, as you said, protect the front of the net. But I don't know if they're necessarily in a rush to do that, because on the whole, whether it's Elias Pettersson or Carson Soucy that's in there, once Hughes comes back in, like the balance they can put together on this defense core, at least on paper, is interesting now because of some of the things that like Elias Pettersson's forced to change in that discussion. If Soucy can find his way back to where he was, if they keep him, of course, there's talk about him possibly being a trade chip. They have a few interesting options right now on defense. They still will need to, if they're going to be if they're going to be a playoff team, and more than just a playoff team, be a not necessarily a contender, because I don't think they're close enough. Although if they make a big trade and use that cap space, maybe they are.
Yeah.
Like they are close enough. If they have one more defenseman, I think their defense core is starting to look pretty solid. And is that a guy that you, like you said, is that just you go for kind of a hard edge guy that you can kind of spot in and play, not every night, but when you need a little more of an edge? I mean, that wouldn't surprise me. Certainly that's something that Rick Tocchet and Adam Foote would be interested in adding.
Well, of course, it's Tucker's kind of player, right? And you'd hope to get someone who would get under McBaby's skin in the playoffs, much like Zadorov did.
Yeah.
All right, let's wrap up with something you wrote about Elias Pettersson for for the risk of being cliche. When you look at this deal, the like a new signing style player or piece of that would be addition by subtraction, and that by getting rid of this source of friction in the locker room with JT Miller, that you would see a rejuvenation of Elias Pettersson, that you get your scoring going again, that you
Right.
get this elite NHL forward. Holy cow! In the games since, that doesn't appear to be the case. Um,
It's really concerning. Like
it's
it,
really concerning. And
yeah.
what are the different scenarios you can see happening here? Because can you give? Just seeing such an avalanche of pressure now on him. Going, okay, you got your way. The other guy got drummed out of town. What? Why am I still not seeing results from you? So, is there hope? Can you give Canuck fans hope, or is this just like, holy cow, this is not going in the right direction?
Well, I mean, the impression certainly has been from what people I talk to is that this is a management team that's saying we want to see, we we want to see if the change in circumstances helps him. Can he be reset? That said, it's not a long leash, um, because in essence they have to get on with it. It's either they're getting on with him or they're getting on with somebody else. They're trying something new. Obviously, trading away a player that you drafted that has been a young star for you is not something you want to do. I mean, I was on Sekeres and Price the other day, and Lawrence Gilman mentioned Cam Neely, and I just almost put my head in my hands because the comparison, the fear there is not off. Um, obviously Pettersson is further along in his career than Neely was when he moved, but the egg in the face from the Neely trade was so dramatic. This it would be equivalent. Could you imagine Pettersson goes somewhere else and just turns back into the player he was 2 seasons ago?
Okay,
Hard, hard
fine,
to-
but I'll counter that by, can you imagine if he's Jim Sandlak and
Yeah,
you were
no,
scared by the Neely thing and you hang on to him for too long, and
yeah,
to once you get past that point of no
yeah,
return, and he's just like, he's a jag. He's
yeah.
just, you're paying $11 million for just a guy.
Yeah, and absolutely, that's why I think they're really looking carefully at this situation. And does that mean that if he doesn't turn it around, tomorrow on Saturday against the Leafs or in the Four Nations face-off or by the deadline, that they'll trade him at the deadline? No, because I think his value actually would be highest. I mean, I don't know how big. I mean, obviously, deadline value is big, but in his situation, I find myself wondering if his value would be bigger at the draft, just because of that full reset, full kind of chance to work with him.
Yeah, but again, this is where the no movement clause kicks in. Every other team knows you've got this massive salary,
Yeah,
and as soon as that new league year kicks
right. You're
over,
now
your
desperate.
options.
Yeah,
Yeah.
true.
So I mean, they look. This is the Canucks have. This is a case of their own doing, right? You've been writing about this. I did want to ask you a technical question. You've written a lot over the last, 8 months or 8, 10 months, whatever, about his shot volume. That seems to me like, and I saw fans mentioning it after the San Jose game. He passed up 4 prime shooting up. Like, is that not something a coach can drill into him? I want you to shoot the puck.
Well, yes, and we can see it. I mean, I was going to say there's two things to consider that the data is a bit different now. I was talking to someone else about this who looks at this stuff at a professional level. Um, NHL shot tracking is better. So trying to do an apples to apples comparison this season versus 2 or 3 seasons ago is actually getting harder and harder. Now, that's not an excuse because we can see that Pettersson is looking off shots. Like you look at the game last night, there were multiple opportunities, especially on their power plays, where he should have been ready to shoot and he just wasn't. And he collected the puck and he fired it back to somebody else and he didn't do anything with it. So is that confidence? Is he thinking the game? Has he lost his way? Is he Steve Blass? Like it's a baffling thing to see. But I think more than anything, you're right. Like you don't want to say just shoot, but I think that's just kind of where he's got to be because he's got a shot. Fundamentally, he's passing up shots that he didn't used to pass up, and why he's doing that, I don't believe is an injury. I think if anything, it's all about confidence. And somehow he's got to get that confidence back.
Well, maybe they should bring in Michael Scott for a a seminar or something. All right, Patrick, we'll leave it there. This is just the one game against the Leafs, which we all know they're going to
They're going to
win.
beat the Leafs. Do
Yeah,
you know the
so
record? Do you know the stat? Since 05-06, the first post-lockout season, essentially the current era, at home versus the Leafs, 17-2.
excellent. Yeah, that's good. Well,
They've
at
won
least
7 in a row, Paul. They've won
at least
7 in a row, which
at
means that
least Leaf,
includes games in that awful COVID season.
yeah, at least Leaf fans get their desired start time. There is that. So, but I am going to ask you then, who's going to win the Super Bowl?
Fly Eagles fly. Let's go. Let's go. Saquon MVP. Let's go. There's no rationality. Listen, I admire what the Chiefs have done. They've done an incredible job. I'm sick of seeing the Chiefs winning. I want to see them.
Everyone is, but not to turn this into a football experiment, but if you universally you talk to or you read stuff from NFL experts and they'll talk about how their offensive line is worse and how this is more of a defensive team and they have they don't have the weapons on offense and it's Chris Jones, not Patrick Mahomes that drives the team. I'm just going to say this, like, people are saying this is the worst Chiefs team to get to the Super Bowl. They've lost 2 games all year, and one of them was when they played their 4th stringers. And I don't get it either. I don't get the worst Chiefs team ever, and they won 7. They're 17-2, and one of them was when they threw their scrubs out, and they've like steamrolled through the playoffs. They're one of the weirdest teams that in all of professional sports. I mean, Canuck fans would be so lucky to have these programs. But I'm with you. I would hope the Eagles would win, but as long as Nick Sirianni is on the sideline and Andy Reid's on the other, I wouldn't bet against the Chiefs. So
it's like saying, I don't know, you got your Montreal Canadiens pennant there, like pick any of the 6 Stanley Cup winners in the 1970s and pick one of those teams and say, well, that was the worst one.
Yeah, I know. No, but this is the thing.
Like, Gordon Robinson only played 50. I don't even know who it would be, but
you'd say this team is the worst, but they have the best record. So
that's what I mean. No, I get it. It's like, come on.
Yeah. Anyway, we went a bit long, but a lot to cover because we didn't give people what they wanted last week. Hope you got a little bit of what you wanted this week. Thank you, Patrick. Go to theprovince.com, vancouversong.com, sign up for Canuck Report. You get everything delivered to you, and we will have another one of these for you next week, even though there is a break.